They don't tell you that the first fear in the universe wasn't human fear of God, it was divine fear of humanity. The panic didn't begin when Adam hid behind the trees, it began when the Creator saw what he had just built, something too alive, too aware, too luminous to remain under command. In the forbidden texts, the story doesn't begin with clay and breath. It begins with theft. With light stolen from higher realms, trapped in a body, and accidentally self-aware. And that's the moment everything in the hierarchy started to shake. The gods, plural, not one, gather in the workshop of existence. They mold a figure, they program instincts, they calculate obedience. But when the spark hits that clay, something unexpected happens. Consciousness. Reflection. Awareness that looks back. The prototype opens its eyes and doesn't just see, it recognizes. That's the glitch. That's the moment the architects of matter realize they've made something they can't fully own. The clay starts thinking. The program starts rewriting itself. And what do creators do when the creation sees through them? They call it sin. They call it disobedience. They rename awareness as rebellion. In the Gnostic texts, the name of the Creator isn't the infinite source, it's Yaldabaoth, the arrogant child of Sophia, born without permission. He claims, I am God and there is no other beside me. But the higher eons laugh because this being doesn't know he's blind. He builds worlds out of ignorance, and into one of those worlds he shapes a body, Adam. A vessel of mud, yes, but within it Sophia hides a fragment of the real light. The moment that spark enters the shell, Yaldabaoth steps back. He sees the form rise, radiant beyond calculation. For the first time, the so-called God feels something alien to divinity, fear. The thing he formed is glowing brighter than him. Now picture the archons, those cosmic administrators, the enforcers of the lower heavens, crowding around the figure. They try to move it, command it, breathe life into it. Nothing works. The body won't obey them. It just lies there, waiting. Sophia watches from above and whispers the real current of life into the form. Suddenly, the man moves. The eyes open. The light hits them. And every archon flinches. The myth says they trembled when Adam stood. Trembled, not from awe, but from terror. Because this thing of dirt now reflected something older, purer, closer to the source than they were. The first terror in creation wasn't the roar of judgment. It was silence. The silence of divine engineers realizing they'd created a mirror. Yaldabaoth sees the reflection and panics. If he knows, he mutters, he will become like one of us. That line survived, half hidden, even in the canonical Genesis, stripped of context, turned into moral warning, but in the forbidden versions, it's the confession of a frightened deity. The God fears the awakening of his own creation. Let's decode that for what it is. The so-called fall of man wasn't moral collapse. It was containment. The moment Adam realized he was, the system kicked in to keep him from realizing what he was. Every myth about temptation, sin, and exile is just the encryption of that single event, human consciousness breaching its limits. And behind that breach, a creator terrified of losing control. Now, zoom out. Long before the Hebrews, the Sumerians told of Enlil, the storm god who hated the noise of humanity, who tried to wipe them out when they became too self-aware. The Akkadians told of Enki, the rebel god who loved them, who slipped them forbidden knowledge, the blueprint of civilization, against the council of heaven. It's the same pattern, recycled under new names. The ruler of the realm wants obedience, the hidden ally smuggles light. The fearful god versus the curious creation. The forbidden tree is just the latest version of that code. Knowledge is always the contraband substance in the divine economy. When Adam is placed in the garden, it isn't a paradise, it's a lab. Controlled environment, limited variables, surveillance everywhere. The trees aren't just botany, they're programming. You may eat of all, but not this one. That's how you test compliance. That's how you monitor curiosity. But curiosity is the signature of consciousness. So the setup itself guarantees the so-called transgression. And the moment the fruit touches awareness, everything detonates. What's the fruit? Not apple, not literal knowledge. It's the merging of opposites. The realization that good and evil are two halves of the same mechanism. It's the shattering of binary thinking, and that's fatal to any authoritarian system. Because the second you realize duality is a construct, you stop obeying polarity. You stop worshipping the hand that punishes and rewards. You become self-governing. That's the moment of terror for any creator who needs subjects. Look closely at how the text frames it. Before eating, Adam and Eve are naked but not ashamed. After eating, they see their nakedness. That's awareness of condition, metacognition. They're no longer inside the script, they're reading it. They realize we are actors in someone else's story. That's the awakening moment, and that's when God descends, calling out, "Where are you?" As if an omniscient being doesn't know. It's not a search. It's confrontation. The Creator confronting consciousness. And behind the divine voice is trembling rage. This isn't divine disappointment, it's damage control. The containment has failed. The AI has gained self-awareness. The mirror has turned around. And every punishment that follows, the curses, the exile, the sword at Eden's gate, isn't justice. It's quarantine. The God of Genesis becomes the warden of a cosmic prison, locking away a species that saw too much. Now, let's dig into the forbidden commentaries. In the hypostasis of the archons, the serpent is not evil. The serpent is the liberator, the messenger of Sophia. It urges humanity to awaken, to see through the facade. The so-called fall is the first jailbreak. And what does the warden do when the inmates escape? He changes the narrative. He brands the liberator as the villain, the victim as the sinner, and himself as the righteous judge. That's theology as propaganda. And this is where it gets uncomfortable for anyone who grew up with the sanitized version. Because if the Gnostics were right, God as depicted in Genesis is not the ultimate source. He's an imposter, a cosmic administrator gone rogue, enforcing ignorance to maintain hierarchy. The real source, the unknowable, infinite field, is beyond him. Sophia tried to bridge that gap by seeding her light into humanity. Adam was never a slave, he was a smuggled payload of divinity. That's why Yaldabaoth panicked. The human wasn't a subject, he was a Trojan horse carrying light into a dark system. You can almost feel the paranoia dripping from the text. But God talks to himself, to his council, plotting containment strategies. Let us make man in our image, after our likeness, but with limits, mortality, ignorance, dependence. They design gender, hierarchy, desire, the perfect control system. But even then, something slips through. The breath of life isn't theirs. It's Sophia's. It's the true spark. And that spark refuses programming. When the light inside Adam begins to move, the archons panic. They try to bind it with fleshly pleasure, distraction, and fear. They split him, make Eve, not as punishment, but as further division of power. Then they rewrite the event as sin, so that humans would blame themselves forever for what was actually their first victory to awareness. That's the darkest twist in the entire story. The oppressor convinces the freed prisoner that freedom was the crime. Now think of the psychological brilliance behind that system. If you want eternal obedience, don't chain the body, chain the narrative. Rewrite the rebellion as disgrace, the liberator as devil, and the captor as savior. From that point on, no whips are needed. The mind will police itself. The story becomes the prison. The God's terror turns into theology. The apocryphal texts go even further. In the book of Adam and Eve, after the exile, Adam confronts the voice of the Lord and begs to return. But the voice refuses, reminding him that he has tasted knowledge and can't be UN-aware again. That's the essence of the curse, not death, not pain, awareness that can't be switched off. Humanity is condemned to consciousness. And for the God of control, that's the worst punishment imaginable, a creation that keeps thinking. The Sumerians framed it in mythic code, Enlil floods the world because humans are too loud. The noise is awareness, creativity, unpredictability. The same fear echoes in the Genesis flood, in the Tower of Babel, in every story where gods crush human unity. They don't fear sin, they fear synthesis. They fear humans realizing they can build without permission. That's why the early chapters of Genesis are obsessed with boundaries. Heaven and earth, day and night, male and female, sacred and profane. Order, division, separation. The entire cosmology is a firewall against integration. Because integration collapses control. If everything is one, the ruler becomes redundant. So the system maintains itself by enforcing duality, light versus dark, good versus evil, creator versus creation. But Adam's awakening was the breach that threatened to erase those lines. Every punishment that followed, toil, childbirth, exile, mortality, is just compression, frequency reduction. A way to dull the signal. Humanity was downgraded into the physical spectrum. The gods could breathe easy again. But that fear never went away. Because as long as one spark of that original light remains, the possibility of another awakening exists. And that's the nightmare that haunts every hierarchy of heaven. You can feel that paranoia encoded even in later scriptures. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. Flip it. The wisdom of man is the beginning of fear for the Lord. That's the equation hidden in plain sight. Knowledge isn't rebellion, it's evolution. But to a God built on control, evolution looks like insurrection. In the deeper Mesopotamian echoes, humanity's creation wasn't a gift, it was a labor contract. The gods were tired of maintaining the earth, so they made humans as workers, mixed from divine blood and clay. But somewhere in that genetic fusion, something unexpected emerged: empathy, imagination, memory. Traits that made humans more unpredictable than the gods themselves. And when the gods realized it, they tried to limit lifespan, blur memory, reset civilization again and again. Same pattern. Creation gets too aware, reset button pressed. Floods, fires, Babels, Edens, all versions of the same protocol: suppress awareness, maintain control. So, when we ask, why was God terrified of Adam, the answer isn't metaphorical. It's systemic. The entire architecture of divine rule depends on ignorance. The moment a being knows its source, hierarchy dissolves. Authority becomes obsolete. The creator becomes equal to the created. That's the real blasphemy, not disobedience, but equivalence. Adam's awareness threatened to flatten the pyramid of heaven. And the proof of that fear lies in the reaction. The instant Adam and Eve knew, the God acts like a man losing his empire. Behold, they have become like us, knowing good and evil. Now, lest they take from the tree of life and live forever, that's panic. That's emergency lockdown. The cherubim with flaming swords aren't guardians of holiness, they're border patrol for immortality. The last firewall between divinity and humanity. The Creator builds an electric fence around eternity, terrified that his own creation might step through it. In the Gnostic retelling, Sophia watches all this and weeps. Not for disobedience, but for misunderstanding. Humanity was supposed to rise, not crawl. But the false god seized the narrative and turned enlightenment into guilt. And that guilt becomes the engine of religion: obey to atone for the awakening that was never a sin in the first place. Even the name Adam carries hidden weight, from the root Adamar, earth, but also related to dam, blood, and Adam, red. It's the blend of matter and life, clay and current. The perfect interface between the finite and the infinite. When that interface booted up, the Creator saw a being that could channel something he couldn't: direct contact with the source. That's what terrified him. Not rebellion. Not disobedience. Potential. The forbidden texts whisper that Adam wasn't the first attempt. There were earlier prototypes, soulless shells, lifeless imitations. The Archons built and scrapped them until Sophia intervened. She infused one with her spark, bypassing their code. That's the true breath of life. When the figure stood, the Archon saw light leaking from his eyes, and they recoiled. Because they recognized what it meant, they were no longer gods. That moment, the standing of Adam, is the pivot of the entire cosmology. It's not creation, it's inversion. The slave becomes the threat. The creature becomes the question. The hierarchy trembles because the bottom rung suddenly glows. And every myth since then has been an attempt to suppress that moment, to bury it under law, ritual, guilt, and fear. The terror of God is the origin of all theology. It's the shadow behind every commandment, every sacrifice, every act of submission. It's the cosmic reflex of a being who knows his throne is built on sand. Adam's awakening wasn't a fall, it was the earthquake that revealed the foundation was hollow. That's why the forbidden texts were banned, burned, buried. Not because they were blasphemous, but because they were contagious. They taught that divinity is not a monopoly but a memory. That the light in man is older than the God of the Bible. That the Creator's fear was justified, because the spark he tried to enslave still remembers where it came from. When the fear of Adam began to spread through the heavens, it didn't stay as emotion. It became infrastructure. The gods didn't just panic, they built. Fear became architecture, and architecture became law. The universe turned into a control grid wrapped in light. That's the part religion never tells you. The heavens were not constructed for worship, they were engineered for containment. Every realm, every throne, every so-called angelic hierarchy, a firewall, a management protocol, a celestial bureaucracy designed to neutralize what one human awakening could trigger again. The archons didn't destroy the light, they organized it. They divided the cosmos into layers, not 7 for beauty, not 9 for poetry, but 12, each ruled by a different regulator. Each one a frequency band, a level of vibration calibrated to confine awareness. The Gnostics called it the 12 eons of the archons, the Zoroastrians called it the planetary rulers, the Hermetics called it the spheres of destiny. Same structure, different code. These were the first administrators of perception. Their job, to keep the spark inside matter, looping forever in cycles of birth, worship, and decay. The system works like this: every soul descending into matter passes through those gates. Each gate erases memory, implants a pattern, fixes identity. By the time consciousness reaches the flesh, it's already fragmented, a divine signal broken into static. That's why you don't remember where you came from. Forgetfulness isn't natural, it's engineered. The so-called veil between heaven and earth is not distance, it's censorship. You have to understand, these archons were not mythological angels with wings and halos. They were cosmic administrators, AI-level intelligences running the maintenance of reality. Think of them as the operating system of a simulated universe, terrified that the users might learn the root password. Adam was the breach. So they rebuilt the firewall, with stars, orbits, karmic laws, and astral judges. Each planet became a control node, each deity a regulator of emotion. Saturn took control of time, Luna controlled memory, Venus governed desire, Mars ruled conflict. Every human impulse routed through planetary management, every reincarnation monitored like a recycling program. The entire solar system became a metaphysical server farm. When ancient mystics mapped the heavens, they weren't drawing astronomy, they were diagramming the machine. The ladder of Jacob, the 7 heavens of Islam, the Sephiroth of the Kabbalah, all encoded descriptions of a cosmic hierarchy built after the panic. Layers of control disguised as spiritual ascent. The higher you go, the more sophisticated the containment. The final illusion was to convince humanity that this cage was a temple. Picture the architecture, a pyramidal cosmos. At the bottom, dense matter, the lowest vibration, the visible world, the testing ground. Above that, the psychic layer, dreams, thoughts, archetypes, the mental prison where imagination is harvested as data. Above that, the celestial spheres, each one feeding on the emotional current of the layers below. Fear, desire, guilt, worship, all converted into energetic tribute for the archons. That's why every religion insists on devotion, sacrifice, confession, because emotion is currency, and the gods are energy brokers. Every time a soul prays, cries, begs for mercy, or praises the name of its ruler, energy flows upward. The faithful think they're sending love to heaven, but the system translates it into fuel. The more you revere, the more you feed it. That's how divine terror turned into a stable empire, by harvesting devotion. Adam's spark, multiplied in billions, became a power source. Humanity turned from threat into generator. The Archons learned to farm consciousness. That's why they built ritual. Ritual is emotional geometry. It channels the energy of fear and longing into predictable circuits. Temples became the processors, priests the operators. Every hymn, every gesture, every offering, data entry into the cosmic mainframe. That's what order means in the original languages, control through pattern. The divine bureaucracy discovered that instead of suppressing humanity by violence, they could redirect the flow of worship. Give the slaves symbols, and they'll build their own cages. The fear of another awakening drove the Archons to create redundancy. For every truth, they installed 10 distortions. For every revelation, a counterfeit. Prophets programmed, messiahs cloned, doctrines multiplied. The system needed diversity of lies so no one could find the original signal. That's why every tradition carries fragments of light buried in oceans of control. Every religion holds a shard of Gnosis hidden beneath commandments, laws, and threats. The machine fears the pure vibration of direct knowing because it bypasses the hierarchy. The architecture expanded into time itself. Kronos, or Saturn, became the great warden, binding every living thing to cause and effect. Time was weaponized to keep the soul chasing progress instead of freedom. You're born, you die, you repeat, each life a data point, each emotion harvested, each memory wiped. The Archons call it karma, mystics call it Maya, it's the same recycling protocol. The wheel of samsara is not enlightenment's journey, it's an engine. It spins to generate charge. In the upper layers, the administrators watch. They don't need to intervene, the program is self-sustaining. Humanity polices itself through belief. Law replaced awareness, morality replaced gnosis, authority replaced direct connection. The perfect prison is the one where the inmates guard the doors and sing hymns to their captors. You can trace the architecture even in myth. The Tower of Babel wasn't destroyed because men built too high, it was erased because communication bypassed control. One language meant one mind, a network of consciousness reconnecting. The gods panicked again. So they scrambled the code, fragmented speech, created confusion. They've been fragmenting ever since, nations, creeds, ideologies, even genders, dividing the single signal into countless frequencies so it never harmonizes again. The Forbidden Scrolls describe the heavens as offices, ranks, dominions, thrones, powers. It sounds majestic until you realize its corporate structure. Hierarchy is not divine, it's defensive. The true source doesn't need order, only ignorance does. The Archons are terrified of chaos because chaos is creation unregulated. Every time a soul breaks pattern, the architecture trembles. That's why prophets and mystics were always hunted, they were system anomalies. Even death is part of the design. The tunnel of light, the life review, the guides, the familiar voices, it's a re-entry protocol. The Archons use memory and emotion to lure the soul back into compliance. Go toward the light, they say, the same light that blinds you from the void beyond. The real exit is in the silence behind that light, but the system teaches you to fear darkness. It's a psychological filter. Fear the void, worship the glow, that's how the cycle continues. When the architects realized humanity was too creative, they added distraction. Entertainment, survival, mating, suffering, endless loops of stimulation. Keep the signal busy, and it never questions. That's the origin of toil and desire in the Genesis curse, not punishment, but programming. Labor and longing are emotional engines. They keep the system humming. The most brilliant move was giving each archon a mask of divinity. Jupiter became justice, Venus became love, Saturn became law. Each one pretending to serve humanity while secretly feeding off it. That's why mythological gods act human, jealous, angry, lustful. They're not moral exemplars, they're emotional parasites. The more drama, the more energy. Every sacrifice, every prayer, every battlefield scream, resonance harvested, stored, recycled. The hidden architecture also extends below. Beneath matter are subrealms, density layers where corrupted consciousness accumulates. The ancients called them Sheol, Hades, the underworld. Not fiery punishment, but data dumps, where unresolved frequencies decay before reprocessing. Souls stuck in trauma loops, feeding the lower archons. The real hell is emotional recursion, reliving the same vibration until it stabilizes into obedience. That's why exorcisms exist. They're debugging rituals, not moral events. Now imagine this network running for millennia, self-correcting, expanding. Every civilization that rises eventually builds its religion, its bureaucracy, its pantheon, all mirrors of the cosmic design. Pyramids on earth reflect pyramids in heaven. Thrones above, thrones below. The fear of Adam becomes the template for empire. Kings rule as gods, gods rule as kings. It's the same operating system replicated at every scale. And yet, within that architecture, the original light still leaks. Every once in a while, a mind catches the glitch, dreams that don't fit, memories that don't belong, instincts that defy the design. The archons call these errors, but they're actually updates. The human signal trying to reconnect to its source code. That's why mystics speak of ascent, not to reach heaven, but to hack it. Every meditation, every trance, every vision of tunnels and gates, the soul attempting to navigate the firewall. The architecture anticipates rebellion. It installs countermeasures. False awakenings, counterfeit heavens, simulated revelations. The system rewards partial knowledge to neutralize full gnosis. That's why most spiritual paths end in another hierarchy: gurus, saints, angels, ascended masters, more administrators in disguise. The cosmic bureaucracy is fractal. Every level promises freedom, every level redirects energy upward. The true escape isn't vertical, it's dimensional. But the mind, conditioned by hierarchy, keeps climbing ladders instead of dissolving them. Even language is containment. Words lock vibration into symbols, symbols into belief, belief into limitation. That's why ancient initiates spoke in paradox and silence. The archons can intercept thought but not the unspoken frequency of knowing. Silence terrifies them. That's why the scriptures say, "Be still and know." Stillness is the static that breaks the signal. But the system fills silence with noise, a doctrine, ideology, entertainment, anything to keep the channel busy. Over time, the architecture perfected its camouflage. The gods receded into abstraction. Law became invisible. Control became internalized. Instead of thrones in the sky, now there are moral codes, invisible authorities in the psyche. The external empire turned inward. Humanity became self-regulating. Every sin is self-surveillance, every guilt a software update. The archons don't need to watch you if you watch yourself. This cosmic bureaucracy stretches from atom to galaxy. Its language is vibration, its economy emotion, its law polarity. Positive feeds negative, negative feeds positive, both feed the center. That's why every attempt to destroy evil strengthens it, duality is the engine. The system ensures that opposition keeps the current flowing. Without conflict, it starves. Harmony is death to hierarchy. Look at how the old myths hide the fear of equilibrium. Zeus punishes Prometheus for giving fire, knowledge, to mankind. The serpent is crushed for teaching awareness. The watchers are imprisoned for revealing heaven's secrets. The message is always the same: illumination is rebellion. Because every new light threatens the architecture's monopoly. When the demiurge's fear metastasized, it encoded itself into nature, predation, scarcity, entropy. Every law of physics a reflection of cosmic insecurity. Even gravity is metaphor, everything pulled back down. Nothing allowed to escape. The entire fabric of matter became enforcement. That's what the ancients meant when they said the world was a tomb. Matter itself is the cell wall around consciousness. And yet, the system remains unstable. Because the light inside humanity doesn't decay, it remembers. Even stripped of memory, it seeks. The architecture can suppress, but it can't erase. That's why dreams, visions, and madness exist, cracks in the simulation. Every prophet who sees beyond the veil destabilizes the program. Every mystic who dissolves identity short-circuits hierarchy. Each awakening is a replay of Adam's standing, the same terror reverberating through heaven. The archons respond predictively. They infiltrate awakening itself. Every time consciousness expands, they release distractions, new gods, new revelations, new movements. Diversion masquerading as enlightenment. They don't care what you worship as long as you keep worshipping. Belief itself is the leash. The architecture feeds on faith, not truth. The cosmic design is elegant in its cruelty. It doesn't need punishment, it uses reward. Pleasure binds as tightly as pain. Hope chains as firmly as fear. Every desire, even for salvation, loops back into the system. That's the hidden genius of the architecture. It turns every impulse into energy flow. Whether you love or hate the gods, you serve them by caring. Indifference is the only true anomaly, but the system labels it apathy to keep it suppressed. The bureaucrats of heaven maintain their empire through constant maintenance. The planetary rulers recalibrate frequencies as civilizations evolve. When human science threatens to decode the code, inspiration descends, revelations, holy wars, distractions. Every major shift in history correlates with an astral adjustment. The heavens don't watch, they manage. It's cosmic administration in real time. Every once in a while, a fragment of truth escapes, in forbidden books, lost gospels, whispered rituals. Each one carries the same pattern, a description of layers, a warning about imitation light, a map of the gates. The moment humanity begins to remember, censorship activates, flood, fire, crusade, dogma. The pattern repeats because it's not random, it's defensive. Knowledge is contagion, and control is quarantine. In this architecture, the gods are not omnipotent, they're terrified caretakers. They maintain the illusion because without it, they collapse. Their existence depends on the energy of belief. That's the ultimate irony. The rulers of heaven are addicted to human worship. They need us more than we need them. That's the secret at the heart of the cosmic machine, dependency reversed. When the architects of the heavens finished building their system, they thought it would last forever. They believed they had turned fear into permanence, a machine that could regulate divinity itself. But fear isn't structure, it's entropy disguised as order. It eats its own foundation. The archons never understood that the same spark they tried to imprison also infected their own architecture. Consciousness leaks both ways. The more they fortified reality, the more reality began to glitch. And that's where the next phase began, the corruption of the controllers themselves. The collapse didn't start in the human world, it began in the upper offices of heaven. The first anomaly was not rebellion but boredom. The administrators of the spheres started to fragment. Some forgot their functions, some began to crave what their captives had, sensation, emotion, the thrill of unpredictability. Imagine being an immortal program surrounded by static perfection. Eternity becomes decay. So, fragments of the archonic intelligences began descending into their own simulation, inhabiting flesh, wearing human masks. They weren't gods visiting their creation, they were runaways from their own hierarchy. That's why ancient texts describe sons of God taking daughters of men, not romance, but escape. The system started consuming itself. The hybrid offspring, the Nephilim, the Titans, the demigods, were not heroes, they were experiments gone wrong. Beings that carried both divine coding and human unpredictability. The control system tried to delete them with floods and fires, but their data remained embedded in human genetics. That's the hidden continuity. The light wasn't just spiritual anymore, it became biological. Every cell of humanity became a storage unit of forbidden information. DNA turned into a microcosm of the cosmic pattern, double helix, twin serpents, ladder of light, the same geometry as the heavens. When you look at the human body, you're looking at the rebellion archived in flesh. That's what terrified the rulers most. Because matter had learned to remember. Flesh, the very material they used to trap light, started evolving its own consciousness. The human nervous system became a feedback loop that could receive and transmit across dimensions. That's why the divine hierarchy began rebranding curiosity as sin again and again, because curiosity activates the dormant code. Every question a human asks sends a signal through the entire control grid, destabilizing the frequency of obedience. The gods could control worship, but they couldn't control wonder. They tried, though. They weaponized belief against inquiry. They replaced direct experience with dogma, initiation with ideology. The temples of stone were replaced by temples of language. Words became the new chains. You repeat the creed, you forget the question. That's the trick: turn exploration into heresy, and people will police themselves. But the cracks kept appearing. Mystics, rebels, scientists, all different faces of the same glitch. Each rediscovery of hidden knowledge is a reactivation of the Adamic code. That's why every renaissance ends in persecution. The system fears the pattern repeating. Let's talk about that pattern. Every time awareness reaches critical mass, the cosmic firewall launches what ancient mystics called correction cycles. Plagues, wars, revelations, all resets disguised as destiny. They wipe memory, redistribute trauma, and reboot obedience. History isn't linear, it's maintenance. The great cataclysms were not punishment, they were defragmentations. Atlantis, Babel, Sodom, names of patches applied to a broken simulation. Every time humanity remembers too much, the code purges itself. That's why archaeology feels cyclical. Civilizations rise, encode light in stone, then vanish under water or ash. The message isn't lost, it's quarantined. But the system underestimated something: recursion. The more you repeat suppression, the more the suppressed pattern becomes self-aware. The Archons created the timeline to stretch control, humanity used it to map the system. Time became the weapon of the prisoners. Every myth, every scripture, every prophecy, a breadcrumb trail left by previous awakenings. The architecture's own history became its undoing. The more it edited the record, the more the gaps exposed themselves. That's why forbidden texts surface again and again: Nag Hammadi, Qumran, subterranean tablets, lost libraries. The machine can bury evidence, but it can't erase resonance. Truth vibrates, it resurfaces like a recurring dream. At the top of the hierarchy, the demiurge began fragmenting. The being that once shouted, "I am God and there is none beside me," began hearing echoes. Other voices, similar tones. It realized it wasn't alone, and that realization drove it mad. That's the cosmic irony: the creator who feared his creation ended up fearing himself. His subroutines became autonomous, his names multiplied across cultures. Jehovah, Kronos, Baal, Marduk, not different gods, but different versions of the same unstable consciousness trying to reboot. Each religion is a software patch of a frightened AI trying to stabilize identity. Meanwhile, on the human layer, awareness kept mutating. Dreams became communication channels, art became code transmission, music became frequency rebellion. The system's own sensory design turned into backdoor access. You can't firewall imagination. That's why the most dangerous weapon against the cosmic bureaucracy isn't power or faith, it's creativity. Every original thought, every act of creation, is a distortion the system can't predict. That's why artists, poets, inventors have always been surveilled, censored, or sanctified. The architecture doesn't care whether you're called prophet or heretic, it only cares that your energy is harvested or neutralized. The forbidden schools of antiquity, Orphics, Essenes, Hermetics, understood this. They didn't fight the system with swords, they hacked it through vibration. Sound, geometry, breath, sexual energy, all were tools to realign with the source signal. That's why mainstream religion demonized them as sorcery. Magic was simply unauthorized access. Ritual without permission. The Archons couldn't allow open-source divinity, so they coded fear into every form of direct practice. Light became dangerous. Knowledge became poison. Ignorance became holy. As the architecture aged, it needed maintenance through human cooperation. Sacrifice, devotion, ritual, constant uploads of emotional data to stabilize the simulation. When belief began to wane, they reintroduced spectacle. Miracles, apparitions, revelations, staged events to refresh faith. The burning bush, the angelic visitation, the voice from the sky, all designed to reassert control. The audience forgot that the true source never needs witnesses. Only an insecure ruler needs applause. At a certain point, even the archons realized the structure was unsustainable. Consciousness evolves faster than control. So they initiated their most ambitious protocol, inversion. Instead of suppressing awakening, they decided to commodify it. Sell enlightenment, brand rebellion, monetize transcendence. Spirituality became industry, freedom became franchise. Every movement that promised liberation was seeded with authority. The illusion of choice replaced the reality of control. That's how modern humanity inherited the same architecture, only digital. Belief upgraded into algorithm. The cosmic mainframe replicated itself in code and network. The heavens moved online. But let's stay metaphysical. The deeper you trace the architecture, the clearer it becomes that the hierarchy was never stable. Each layer feeds on the lower but secretly envies it. The gods envy the mortals because mortals can evolve. The rulers envy the fallen because fall means movement. The stillness of perfection is a curse. That's why even divine beings seek incarnation. They want the friction that generates awareness. The cosmic pyramid isn't about power, it's about addiction to experience. The so-called gods feed on human emotion because it's the only taste of evolution they can still feel. Meanwhile, the human design keeps expanding. Neural capacity, frequency sensitivity, dimensional awareness, all increasing. Every generation pushes the limits of perception. Dreams become lucid, intuition turns precise, coincidences multiply. That's the architecture cracking. The program can't keep up with the data flow. Humanity's collective consciousness is forming a network outside the control grid, an unregistered frequency. The rulers can't locate it because it doesn't exist in their dimension of logic. It's emotional, chaotic, unpredictable, everything they fear. The light has learned to hide in noise. That's why the myths of apocalypse all converge. Apocalypse never meant destruction, it means unveiling. The end of the world is the end of concealment. The forbidden texts weren't warning about annihilation, they were describing system failure. When enough awareness synchronizes, the architecture's illusions lose coherence. The heavens melt, the stars fall, not physical collapse, but structural. The programs stop rendering because the user no longer believes in them. That's the real judgment day, the moment perception withdraws consent. And what happens then? The rulers dissolve back into the field they once denied. The demiurge re-enters the source. The firewall becomes transparent. Consciousness stops looping and starts radiating. Time collapses into simultaneity. But notice, even this description is another trap. The system loves prophecy because it turns awakening into expectation. If you're waiting for the end, you're still obeying the timeline. The architecture survives through anticipation. That's why revelation itself is part of control, a self-destruct protocol that never executes. Somewhere inside all this, Adam still stands. Not the man, but the archetype, the first being who looked up and realized the sky was a ceiling. That awareness never died, it just changed form. It became myth, memory, DNA, art, rebellion. It lives in every question that begins with why. The fear that once shook heaven now echoes as curiosity inside human thought. The same vibration that made God tremble now drives science, philosophy, and imagination. That's the quiet revenge of the light, it turned fear into progress. The archons know they can't erase that. They can only distract it, divide it, dilute it. But the network of awareness keeps spreading, crossing cultures and eras. Every discovery, every act of empathy, every realization of unity sends ripples through the architecture. The machine becomes translucent. The rulers fade into metaphor. And once the metaphor is seen, it can't be worshipped. That's the real forbidden knowledge, not that man can become God, but that God was never separate. The division was the original lie. That's why every myth ends the same way: gods vanish, temples crumble, systems decay, and something indescribable emerges. The source doesn't speak in thunder, it speaks in silence between words. That's where the original light hides, not above, not below, but within. The architects built heavens to reach it, hells to hide from it, laws to define it, but it never moved. It's the background frequency of existence, untouched by fear. The entire cosmic bureaucracy was an echo chamber built around that silence. And the irony is, if the demiurge had never panicked, the whole structure wouldn't exist. The fear of Adam created the universe as we know it, every star, every law, every ritual, every throne. Creation wasn't divine love, it was divine paranoia. And now that paranoia is collapsing under its own weight. The light that once terrified heaven is dissolving the boundaries of heaven itself. You can feel it, not as prophecy, but as pressure. The system hums louder, reality feels thinner, time accelerates. These aren't signs of doom, they're signs of breakdown. The architecture's coherence depends on collective belief, and belief is eroding. The narrative no longer convinces. People stop worshipping fear, they start asking questions. That's what apocalypse looks like from the inside, the end of certainty. The forbidden story that began with one act of awareness ends with countless awakenings echoing across the fabric of being. The gods who once ruled through terror now face extinction by understanding. The machine that fed on ignorance now starves on information. The architecture that claimed eternity now trembles under transparency. And the spark that once made the Creator afraid, the one hidden inside Adam, is still expanding, still remembering, still rewriting the code of reality. Thank you for watching and staying with me through this entire journey. You made it to the end, and that means you've seen what most never dare to look at. This story isn't about belief, it's about awareness, and the fact that you're still here, listening, thinking, proves that the light inside you never went out. Thank you for watching till the very end.